As soon as the Omicron wave landed, it seemed like everyone suddenly knew someone who had been sick with COVID, often lots of people who had been very careful. As those numbers hopefully trend down, what do those who've recovered need to know about their immunity going forward? Let's ask, both in the provincial capital. Colin Furness, infection control epidemiologist and assistant professor at the University of Toronto, and Susy Hota, medical director of infection prevention and control and an infectious diseases specialist at the University Health Network. Welcome to you both.
Thanks.
So I'm one of those people who's dodged. I keep seeing memes on social media of people who've dodged COVID over the past 2 years, and this is not to make light of it, but it seems as if now everyone knows somebody who's had COVID. And I wanted to start our discussion by reading some quotes of people who have had Omicron and recovered. This is what some of them have said. It's just a load off your mind. Even other people who haven't had it, I find are more receptive to hanging out because they're not worried that I will spread it. I am so relieved. I don't have the luxury of working from home. Being slightly sick for a few days was a small price to pay for being able to go to work without feeling paranoid. And one person said there was a part of her that was happy that I, quote, got it. Colin, I'd like to start with you. If you've had Omicron and recovered, how should you be feeling right now?
I can certainly understand why people would be expressing relief, partly because in these cases, they were fortunate to have had only a mild case. They didn't land up in hospital. They didn't land up with what sounds like long COVID. And so I think that would be quite relieving. In terms of their confidence about their immunity, I think the picture is less clear. COVID has been very good at evading our defenses. It's been very good at evolving. And it's entirely possible that people could be reinfected. We don't know yet. Omicron is still too new.
What about the sentiment? This earlier this week, Dr. Kieran Moore said, we have to learn how to live with COVID. If someone hears that, how do you think they're going to receive that message?
I think it depends on their stance. If you have parents of children under 5 who cannot be vaccinated and who are acutely aware of the rising hospitalization rates in that very young age group, it's extremely distressing, I think. And I've had many conversations with people in exactly that situation. Others have also been doing enough reading to know that this is a brain invasive virus and loss of brain tissue is a possibility. So there's a lot to be worried about. And when our chief medical officer of health says, let's just learn to live with it, I think that's upsetting to a great number of people. It's pretty dispiriting to me.
And Susie, one of the people that I quoted said that their friends would be more comfortable hanging out with them since they've had Omicron. Should they be?
It's a really difficult thing to kind of, wrap your head around. First of all, in the short term, after you've had an Omicron infection, yes, you're probably immune. And yes, the chances that you would, get sick from it again in that, say, 3 months or so after your infection is quite low. However, can you still pick up some of the virus and transmit to others? We don't really know. As Colin had mentioned, there's so much we still don't really know about the immunity after an Omicron infection. But I think a lot of these comments too are really just speaking to the enormous mental burden that this has taken, on people, having to think about, will I get infected? Won't I? What will it be like when I get an infection or if I get an infection? And that's where a lot of these comments are coming from, where people feel so relieved. But we have to be careful not to extrapolate too far from that.
And Colin, just to build on what Susie was saying, we don't know very much. A lot of the data I think we're dealing with was the previous strains of COVID-19. When you hear people, I think for some people, when they hear mild, they're not relieved, as you said, if you have children under 5, or if you're living with a disability, or if you're immunocompromised. How would you characterize the level of protection that Omicron gives people?
As Susie said, we're just not sure. I mean, the evidence is mixed prior to Omicron in terms of whether natural immunity is better or worse than vaccinated immunity. Of course, there's multiple vaccines. There's probably genetic factors at play. I think there's going to be a wide range of individual responses. And so I think it's worrisome, or it's problematic to make blanket statements about safety with respect to immunity following infection. This is, for many people, an extremely dangerous virus, and we know many instances where people have been reinfected. That still doesn't tell us very much, except that we shouldn't be complacent. I think that would be the one big mistake to make, would be to be complacent.
And Susie, this is a question for you both, but Susie, I'll start with you. Pre-Omicron studies have compared the level of immunity from a COVID infection to a single dose of vaccination, others a double dose. And we've been hearing from people say, I've had COVID, so I don't need to be vaccinated. How should we understand the level of immunity we get from vaccines versus infections? Susie, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, we deal with different variants over the course of this pandemic, so it's hard to draw conclusions from data from one study. But the other part of it is, as scientists, we don't just look at one study or two studies and say, okay, we have the answer. We have to look at the full body of evidence. And when it comes to this question of which is better and how do they compare in terms of infection-related immunity versus vaccine-related immunity, or what we call hybrid immunity, where you've had vaccines plus you've also had an infection as well, we truly don't really know. It's not so clear. Probably those who've had both vaccines and infections are best protected, at least in the short term. But the durability of the protection from infection versus vaccines or hybrid immunity is really not that clear, and especially with Omicron.
Colin?
I think there's a large number of case reports of people who were getting autoimmune disease, long COVID, so fatigue, inflammation, and many case reports where vaccination following that caused it to clear up. Now, I'm not an immunologist, I'm not a vaccinologist, and that's a bit of a head scratcher to me. But when I see multiple case reports, what that says to me is vaccination is able to do something very useful for your immune system that infection alone can't. And autoimmune disease is very debilitating. So I think that's pretty key evidence right there to say that they're not substitutable for each other. And I would always choose vaccination whether or not I was infected.
And does it matter how severe the infection was? We've been talking, a lot of people have been saying that Omicron is mild. Does it matter if it's a mild infection or if it's a severe case of COVID? Does that impact immunity, Susie?
Well, in general, say you were not vaccinated and you got a very severe infection, it is possible that your protection and the durability of that protection from that infection would be greater than if you had a milder infection. But again, a lot of unknowns with that. And when we're starting to talk about an era where we've got highly vaccinated individuals, whether you had a mild infection or a more severe infection after you've been vaccinated, it's really hard to know whether that's going to make a difference in what your longer term protection would be. So it is less clear after we're dealing with vaccines. But on that topic, at 2 doses of vaccines, even with Omicron, provides really good protection against severe illness. And I think we can't lose sight of that. And that's really carried on over across a number of different variants. So that kind of protection is really what our goal is, and why it is that we keep encouraging people to get vaccinated, and why a third dose actually is really important right now, because it improves those chances even further.
There's something that I've been seeing friends talk about, or even people. So I've also seen it shared on social media. So I don't know if this is disinformation or misinformation, but I thought I might just bring it up because we are seeing people who are double vaccinated and have the booster, but they are still ending up in hospital. Is this a matter of the efficacy of the vaccines, or maybe people just kind of feeling as if they're invincible, and because they have that protection that they no longer have to be as careful? Colin?
I think we're going to see, and we have seen, a wide range of individual response. Just because you've been vaccinated doesn't mean that your immune system is fully functional. You might have risk factors, and there's a large number of them. You might have risk factors you don't know about. And so I think just to simply assume that once you've had the jab, you're good to go. I think it's a problem of complacency, I think, and that's not something I would advise at all. This is a dangerous enemy, and I'm very happy for people who've only had mild cases. But let's also remember, this is not really a respiratory virus. It's got a respiratory phase, which may be mild or acute, and then it goes in across your system from your toes to your brain. And we know that 100% of child cases, no matter how mild they are, show markers for microclotting. That can lead to loss of brain tissue. So the mild respiratory phase doesn't necessarily tell you what you're dealing with.
And Susie, just to build on what Colin is saying, because I guess for us to get to collective immunity, which has been said is going to be the end to the pandemic, we need to start with individuals. And I think the information is changing so much, And how do you communicate the seriousness of this virus when the information seems to be changing, and some people have now concluded that if I get vaccinated or not vaccinated, I'll get sick, and it's going to be a mild thing for me.
It is increasingly difficult over the course of this pandemic, in part because no matter what you say or what the virus is doing, people are just tired of this. And I completely understand that feeling. But, our behaviors are also affecting the overall risk. And we do have to be, keeping our eye on what the overall goal is. Yes, at some point we will reach a point where enough people have some immunity, whether it be by vaccines or through infections, that this will kind of peter out into something different, and it won't be as much of an impact on our society and on us as individuals. But we're clearly not there yet, and we have to keep up our behaviors up until that point. Information will continue to change. There are new variants that we're watching and may arise and come and cause new waves of activity. And at this point, although everyone's feeling tired, I think we just have to be honest about what's going on and try and, rally around each other to help each other keep up and be resilient through these, next stages of the pandemic so we can get to that point.
And I guess one of the stumbling blocks that we've kind of are feeling right now are the needs for vaccine mandates, and a smaller percentage of society pushing back on them. The European Union treats documented recovery from COVID-19 as functionally the same as vaccination in their vaccine passport systems. Should we be doing the same? Colin, I'll start with you.
When you mandate vaccines, you do get this pushback from a small number of people, as you say, but it is a loud number of people. And it's a concerning sign because it starts to erode faith in science. It starts to erode faith in our political system. It's very, very disruptive. So I can see the appeal of diffusing that by saying, look, you can choose to get sick or you can choose to get vaccinated. So I see social advantages to that. But from a scientific basis, it's not clear to me that that's actually a very good idea at all. And so it's an open question. I completely understand the rationale for doing that, but that rationale is political rather than scientific.
Can you help me understand? Because, from our conversation, it seems as if you do get vaccinated, or if you get infected, that it kind of is similar. If it is similar, would people who say that, getting sick with COVID-19 should be considered the same as getting a vaccine? Could you explain to us why that might not be the best thing to do moving forward?
Well, the scientific evidence is mixed. You can find studies that say natural immunity through infection has better protection, and there are studies that find exactly the opposite. What that tells us is the situation is complicated. What that tells us is we don't know. And again, I keep coming back to that idea of complacency, the attitude that, hey, I've had this once. I had some past variant many months ago. I'm immune. I'm fine. The pandemic is over for me. That's really problematic because you can get reinfected. This does happen. And if you are complacent, you may be putting other people at risk who will not experience a mild case. And so I think when we're thinking about a vaccine certification system, we need to think about not just what people's feelings are and their attitudes are toward vaccination. We have to think about people who we're trying to protect, who are vulnerable, the very young, the very elderly, and people who have other health conditions that put them at high risk.
And Susie?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. They're kind of two different things. There's the issue of vaccine mandates to begin with, and then there's, what rules do you place around them? And I agree that there's, such limited data to help us understand if a natural infection related immunity or immune response is equivalent to what we've seen with vaccines. And we've really studied the vaccines and how long they've protected people across different variants and how that has impacted on, hospitalization risk. And we have a good understanding of that. So it is hard to then, try and pull it all together. Ultimately, it's a decision that just had to be made. Are we going to accept an infection as equivalent to, vaccines with the limited information we have that it may or may not be equivalent? Or are we going to say, you know what, just get vaccinated. We'll take that as your proof of immunity and end it there. The decision was made here to just accept the vaccines. And so I think we follow that for now. And if the information changes and it becomes acceptable down the road to actually accept an infection, as long as a system can be developed that people can actually show evidence that they were infected and that they recovered from it, and what the date of that was, then perhaps that can be entertained down the road.
I wanted to read a quote from an Atlantic article from January, and they write, "This may well be the last COVID surge that plays out in such a staggering fashion. We may, for a time, get a touch of reprieve. Even if a new antibody dodging variant screeches onto the scene, there are limitations to how this virus can evolve," said Marion Pepper, an immunologist at the University of Washington. By this point, perhaps many immune systems will have seen enough to anticipate what hijinks the virus lobs at us next. This question is for you both. Colin, are we all safer now coming out of Omicron?
Well, we may well be. It's such a contagious variant. It's displaced other variants. And in that sense, it could be good news. In other words, maybe we just have this one foe. I'd also say that it's so contagious. It's estimated to be just about as contagious as measles, or maybe more so. That's the most contagious thing we know, and so it could well be, as that quotation suggests, that it's come up against the upper limit of contagiousness. And if it's doing that and not causing widespread death, that's actually a really good news story. And if it infects enough people, and if we do enough vaccination, would it burn out? That could be how Spanish flu ended. We don't know, but that's a plausible scenario. It's an attractive scenario. It's one that I hope happens, but unfortunately, I don't think it's the only way forward.
And Susie?
I'm not sure I agree with everything that Colin has said. I think it feels like a lot of people have been infected. And in fact, with, changes in testing criteria, it's hard to know exactly how many people have been infected over the course of this Omicron wave. My sense is there are probably still a lot of susceptible folks out there, who haven't been infected. And vaccines will continue to protect us to some degree. But I think that when you pull it all together, to me, it seems likely that we will see subsequent waves of activity, hopefully not as robust as what we've seen with this Omicron wave, but we can't really say. We really don't know what's going to come up in the next little while. Eventually, as is mentioned in that quote, we will have enough broad population-based immunity from both the vaccines and infections that, yes, we will have fewer hosts that will get infected or be susceptible to infection, and this will peter out. Is that going to be in 6 months? Is that going to be in 2 years? That is anybody's guess.
And Colin?
I think those are very fair comments. This virus has outwitted us at every stage. And I think there's a graveyard of predictions of we're done and we're out of this, that I think are embarrassing to those who have uttered them. So, the idea that maybe we're at the end because Omicron is so contagious and got everyone, that's one scenario. But as Susie says, there's a lot of opportunity for a new form, an immune escaping form, to reinfect or to continue to infect pockets of people who are susceptible. No question.
Does this make it more probable that we're near herd immunity or not? Susie?
Herd immunity is a really tough thing to define when it comes to a pandemic like this. I don't think we're quite at a point where we've sort of gotten to a tipping point where, so many people are immune after this surge that we're not going to have a subsequent wave. I'm actually expecting that we might have little blips up and down. The real point to be watching for is, can we manage? Can the healthcare system continue to function without being overwhelmed? How sick are people going to get from this, and what's it looking like in terms of waning immunity, and whether we need to, ramp up booster doses and such. That's what I think the near future is going to be looking like. I don't think herd immunity is something we should focus on at this point. I think it's about,
Why not?
how do we manage? Because, like we talked about, different variants come up and they change the picture. And I feel like when people anchor to a concept like, we'll all just get immune and it'll be over, it's a little bit too black and white compared to what the scenarios that could arise over the next, several months could look like. We've already seen Alpha and then Delta and then Omicron. And, we know that BA2, one of the sublineages of Omicron that we're very familiar with here right now, is something that's on the rise in different areas. We just don't know what it's going to look like if it comes over here and starts to take off. Will it set off another surge, or will we have enough pre-existing immunity from the BA1, this current version of Omicron, that it won't impact us so much? My position is when there's so much uncertainty of what the future will be like, don't anchor on one concept of, herd immunity, it's going to be over. You have to be flexible. You have to be willing to accept the fact that, things will be better, but we have to continue to react to what's going on, and we can't just dismiss it as it's done.
And Colin, I think a lot of us are kind of crossing our fingers for herd immunity because we want this thing to be over. But following what Susie said, is herd immunity now considered an impossibility?
I would prefer to look at herd immunity as a question of degree. I don't think we should look at it as a yes, no. It's just flip a switch and we have it or we don't. We clearly have a lot of population immunity to COVID now. If you could imagine some isolated population that had never been exposed to COVID, Omicron would rip through it with devastating effect. We don't have that. So we do have some population protection. The idea that the virus is going to disappear completely because of population immunity, it seems attractive, but also elusive. And so I think I really, really agree with what Susie had to say. Latching on to that one concept to say that's the way out of this, I think is wishful thinking, and wishful thinking usually leads to disappointment.
We have maybe 60 seconds left, but something that I keep thinking about is that it just feels as if we're at a maybe like a tipping point where people are just so tired of the situation that we've been in. What would you say to people who might say, I'm not getting a third shot, I'm not getting a fourth shot. This is the situation that we're living in, and I'm just going to live my life. I'll give you both 30 seconds. Susie, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think a third shot is really important at this stage because we have good data that shows it improves your chances of actually being protected against symptomatic infection, but more importantly, it will improve your chances of not getting a severe infection. And I think, again, we have to keep our eye on what the goal is, and that's to be able to manage with Omicron and with other forms of COVID around. I don't think there's sufficient data to think that a fourth dose is going to be necessary for everyone in the short term. Perhaps in the future, we'll need to have additional doses to boost our immunity if it wanes. But I think that there will also be developments in terms of what those booster shots can look like, and perhaps some more research into more universal sort of SARS-CoV-2 vaccines that will protect us against multiple variants that might arise in the future better than our current vaccines.
And Colin?
I think I'll boil it down to something very simple. How soon do you want this to be over? If you want it to be over soon, do your part and get vaccinated. More vaccination is better. And I would absolutely second what Susie just said. We may, and I think we will, end up with a better vaccine that is more robust against a wide range of variants. But vaccination is something that's easy to do. And if the more people who do it, the sooner we get out of this.
Colin and Susie, thank you so much. We know you're really busy, and we appreciate you taking time out to explain these complex things to us. We really appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thanks.
having me on the show.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.